Ma'am, stop right there. I need to speak with you.
About what? I'm just heading to my car.
You match the description of someone I'm looking for.
What description? I was inside the store.
Don't argue. I need your ID now.
I'm being stopped with no reason while running errands.
She was already unlocking her car when the voice came from behind her. Not loud, not urgent, just firm enough to make her stop. Ma'am, hold on a second. Angela Carter turned, keys still in her hand. She was feet from the driver's door, groceries in one bag, pharmacy receipt folded in her purse. Errands done. Day moving on. Then she saw the uniform. The officer had positioned himself between her and the car, close enough to block the door without touching it. Not aggressive, not polite either, just present. Angela asked the first question any adult would ask. Is there a problem? The answer didn't match the situation. You fit a description. No description given. No crime mentioned. No urgency in the air. Just a sentence designed to sound official. Angela looked around instinctively. The parking lot was calm. Cars idling. A shopping cart rattling across the pavement. No flashing lights. No sirens. No one running. Nothing that explained why she had suddenly become the focus. What description? She asked. The officer didn't answer that. Instead, he asked for her ID. No explanation. No reason provided. Just a demand. Angela hesitated, not in defiance, but in disbelief. She wasn't driving. She hadn't been stopped. She hadn't been accused of anything. And yet, here she was, being asked to prove who she was in the middle of a parking lot. The officer shifted his stance. Not closer, but firmer. The kind of posture meant to remind you who's in control. Around them, people slowed their pace. A man loading groceries paused. A woman near the entrance stopped pushing her cart. Eyes lingered longer than they should have. Angela could feel it. That subtle change in the air when attention turns public. She kept her voice calm. I haven't done anything wrong. The officer repeated himself. I need to see your ID. Still no explanation. Still no description. Still no crime. The bodycam blinked quietly on his chest, capturing every second. Her face. His tone. The space between them. Angela became aware of her hands. Where they were, how they moved. Not because she was afraid, but because experience had taught her caution. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a test. Ask too many questions, and you're uncooperative. Say too little, and you're suspicious. And standing there, keys in hand, heart steady but mind racing, Angela realized how thin the line was between an ordinary errand and becoming a problem, without ever knowing why. Nothing about the moment made sense. And that's what made it unsettling. Because confusion is manageable. Vulnerability is survivable. But disbelief, the kind that settles in when authority refuses to explain itself, that's what stays with you long after the parking lot empties. Angela Carter is not someone who stands out. That's not an insult. It's a fact that has defined most of her adult life. Early 40s. Office administrator for a regional logistics firm. 20 years of routine, reliability, and being the person who keeps things running quietly in the background. She lives less than 10 minutes from that shopping center. Same route. Same stores. Same parking rows. Pharmacy on the left. Grocery store straight ahead. Dry cleaner tucked beside the nail salon. She's been doing that loop for years, usually on her lunch break or just after work. In, out, home. The kind of routine most people stop noticing. Angela is known to the cashiers. Recognized by face, not name. A nod here. A quick smile there. No drama. No friction. Her record reflects that kind of life. No criminal history. No traffic violations worth mentioning. No past encounters with police that ever required explanation or paperwork. She has never been detained. Never been questioned. Never been asked to prove who she was in public. Until now. That day wasn't different because of where she went. It was different because of how ordinary it was. Midday errands. Prescription refill she'd been waiting on all week. Groceries for dinner. Chicken, vegetables, coffee she forgot to buy last time. Dry cleaning she kept meaning to pick up. Nothing rushed. Nothing suspicious. She wore what she always wore on errand days. Practical shoes, neutral clothes, hair pulled back. No hood. No sunglasses. No attempt to blend in or stand out. Just someone moving through her own life. And that's what made the stop so jarring. Because suspicion doesn't usually announce itself. It creeps in quietly, attached to a tone, a pause, a look that doesn't belong. One moment, Angela was thinking about what to cook that night. The next, she was being evaluated. Not for something she did, but for something she supposedly matched. A description that never came with details. A concern that never came with context. The shift was immediate. Normal life fractured into something else. Her body reacted before her mind caught up, shoulders stiffening, breath slowing, posture adjusting. Not fear exactly. Awareness. The kind learned over time. The kind passed down in conversations that start with, "Just be careful," and end with silence. Angela wasn't angry yet. She wasn't scared yet. She was trying to understand how a life built on predictability could suddenly feel unstable. Because when an ordinary routine becomes suspicious, it forces a question no one wants to ask. If nothing about today was unusual, then what was? And standing in that parking lot, Angela realized this wasn't about where she'd been, or what she was doing. It was about how quickly normalcy can be suspended, and how easily an ordinary person can be recast as a problem, without warning, without reason, and without a chance to opt out. This wasn't a disruption of her schedule. It was a disruption of trust. And once that's shaken, even the most familiar places stop feeling neutral. The words stayed the same. Only the pressure behind them changed. "You fit the description." Angela waited, not to argue, but to listen. She expected details to follow. They never did. "What description?" she asked again, slower this time. The officer didn't look confused. He didn't consult a radio. He didn't check a screen. He simply repeated himself. "Ma'am, I need you to cooperate." Cooperate with what? He never said. Angela shifted her weight slightly, conscious of how small movements can be misread. Her voice stayed even. "Am I being detained?" It was a fair question. A legal one. The officer didn't answer it. Instead, he took half a step closer. Not enough to touch her. Enough to crowd her space. "I need to see your ID," he said again, louder now. Still no explanation. Still no description. Still no crime. Behind him, a second officer stood several feet back. Hands folded. Eyes forward. Silent. No intervention. No clarification. No visible disagreement. Just presence. Angela glanced briefly at the second officer, not for rescue, but for confirmation that this was actually happening. The silence answered her. She returned her focus to the first officer. "I'm asking if I'm being detained," she said. "If not, I'd like to leave." That sentence changed the temperature. The officer's jaw tightened. His tone sharpened. "You're not free to go until I determine what's going on." Determine what? He still didn't explain. The phrase hung there, deliberately vague. Authority without specifics. The bodycam captured the shift. His voice rising. Her voice staying controlled. A few feet away, a car door slammed. Someone muttered under their breath. The audience was growing. Angela could feel eyes on her back now. On her hands. On her face. This wasn't just an interaction anymore. It was a performance, and she hadn't volunteered for the role. She reached slowly into her purse, narrating the movement out loud, the way she'd been taught. "My ID is in my wallet." The officer nodded, but didn't step back. As she handed it over, he leaned in slightly, scanning her face, her posture, her reaction. Not checking facts. Checking compliance. "This would go a lot easier if you stopped asking questions," he said. The sentence landed heavier than the command. Because questions are how adults understand the world, and discouraging them is how power stays unchallenged. Angela swallowed the response that came naturally. She knew better than to escalate. Not because she was wrong, but because escalation is often assigned, not chosen. "You said I fit a description," she said quietly. "I'm asking what that means." The officer exhaled sharply, like patience had been spent. "I don't have to explain myself to you," he said. "Just do what you're told." That was the moment suspicion stopped pretending to be procedure. No substance. No specificity. Just authority leaning forward, daring resistance. And as the officer stood there, voice raised, body angled closer, Angela understood something deeply unsettling. This wasn't about finding someone. It was about testing someone. Testing how much pressure could be applied, before silence replaced questions, and compliance replaced clarity. And in that parking lot, surrounded by strangers, under a camera that would later tell the truth, suspicion existed, loud and confident, without ever needing evidence to justify itself. The decision wasn't announced. It was implied. Stay right there. Angela hadn't tried to leave. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't refused a command. But the tone changed again, slower now, heavier. Detention without the word. The officer shifted his position so she was fully boxed in. Car to her left, his body in front, empty pavement behind. No exit. No explanation. Just containment. This is starting to look like resistance, he said casually, as if testing how the word sounded out loud. Angela blinked once. Resistance, she repeated. I'm standing still. I'm answering you. The officer tilted his head slightly, the way authority does when it wants compliance to feel voluntary. I'm telling you how this can go, he said. You keep questioning, it escalates. Escalates. The word did its work. A phone lifted somewhere behind her. Then another. Shoppers slowed completely now, pretending to look for keys, receipts, anything that allowed them to stare without admitting they were watching. Angela could feel the exposure settle in. This wasn't private. This wasn't discreet. This was happening in the open, in daylight, surrounded by people who didn't know her and didn't need to. The officer glanced at her wrists. You don't want to end up in cuffs over something small. It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was worse. It was said like advice. Angela felt the weight of that moment press down. Not fear, but calculation. Every word now mattered. Every movement could be reinterpreted. She steadied her breathing. I'm not resisting, she said evenly. I'm asking why I'm being detained. The officer stepped closer again. Lower your voice, he said, though she hadn't raised it. The second officer remained where he was. Still silent. Still watching. Not stepping in. Not stepping away. The body cam caught everything. The proximity, the tone, the absence of cause. Angela's hands stayed visible at her sides. Her posture straight. Her voice calm. Because dignity, she knew, doesn't announce itself. It has to be protected. A woman nearby whispered, "What's happening?" Someone else shook their head. Angela heard none of it clearly. Just the hum of attention, the uncomfortable awareness of being judged without context. This was humiliation without accusation. She hadn't been told what she'd done wrong. Only what could happen if she didn't stop asking. The officer looked down at her again. Last chance, he said. Do you want to make this harder than it needs to be? Angela met his eyes. I want to understand why this is happening, she said. There was no apology. No clarification. Just a pause. Long enough to assert dominance. Short enough to keep control. In that pause, Angela understood the real pressure wasn't physical. It was reputational. Public. Psychological. Being seen as a problem is sometimes more damaging than being charged as one. And standing there, calm, compliant, surrounded by strangers with cameras, Angela carried the full weight of restraint not because she was guilty, but because she refused to surrender her dignity to a situation that offered none in return. This wasn't about arrest. It was about how power tests how much humiliation a person will endure before they stop insisting on being treated like a citizen. The story didn't change on the pavement. It changed later, quietly, methodically, in writing. Within hours, the incident was reduced to a paragraph in a police report. A clean narrative. Controlled language. Subject matched description. Subject was uncooperative. Officer safety concerns. On paper, it made sense. On video, it fell apart. Angela requested the body cam footage the next morning. Not out of anger, out of necessity. Because when an encounter leaves you feeling unsettled but uncharged, the only question left is whether what you felt was real or whether it can be explained away. The department stalled at first, then delayed, then complied. And when the footage was released, it didn't just clarify the stop. It dismantled it. There was no dispatch call sending the officer to the parking lot. No bolo. No alert. No report of a crime in the area. The timestamp told the truth before anyone spoke. The officer initiated the stop on his own. The description was never mentioned because it didn't exist. No clothing. No height. No direction of travel. Just a phrase, vague enough to justify a stop, hollow enough to collapse under scrutiny. The video showed Angela exactly as she remembered herself. Standing still, hands visible, voice calm, asking questions without raising it. There was no refusal, no aggressive posture, no sudden movements. What the footage did show was escalation, but not from her. It showed the officer stepping closer each time she asked for clarification, raising his voice while telling her to lower hers, using words like resisting before she had done anything that could resemble resistance. The contrast between tone and conduct was unmistakable. And then there was the silence. The second officer. Present. Watching. Saying nothing. Not correcting. Not clarifying. not documenting a reason. The report claimed Angela was argumentative. The video showed her measured. The report suggested officer safety concerns. The video showed distance maintained until the officer closed it himself. The report referenced a description. The video showed no such thing. When the footage was reviewed internally, questions followed. When it reached the public, accountability arrived faster. A bystander's phone recording, grainy but clear enough, surfaced first. Then another angle. Then the full body cam. Clips spread across social media within hours. Viewers noticed the same things investigators did. The lack of cause, the imbalance of power, the casual nature of the escalation. Comment sections filled with a familiar refrain. If this is what compliance looks like, what was she supposed to do? The department issued a statement. Careful, non-committal. We are reviewing the footage. But the narrative had already shifted. This wasn't about interpretation anymore. It was about evidence. And evidence has a way of flattening authority. Because once people saw the full encounter, uninterrupted, unedited, timestamped, the question changed. It was no longer, why did she react that way? It became, why was she stopped at all? The video didn't show a threat. It showed a woman navigating suspicion without substance. And once that truth was visible, frame by frame, the power of the report collapsed under the weight of what the camera had quietly captured all along. The bodycam didn't accuse. It simply remembered. And in doing so, it made denial impossible. The lawsuit didn't come quickly. It came deliberately. After the footage circulated, after the statements were issued, after the initial shock faded into something more durable, resolve, Angela Carter sat across from a civil rights attorney who had seen this pattern before. Different cities, different parking lots, same language, same outcome. The complaint was filed in federal court. Not municipal, not internal, federal. Because what happened to Angela wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a constitutional question. The filing laid it out plainly. Racial profiling, unlawful detention, violation of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable seizure. No dramatic language, no exaggeration, just facts aligned with evidence. The lawsuit argued that Angela was stopped without reasonable suspicion, detained without cause, and threatened with arrest to enforce compliance, all while committing no crime, violating no law, and presenting no risk. The bodycam footage wasn't supplemental. It was central. Every claim matched a timestamp. Every allegation matched a frame. The attorney didn't need to speculate about motive. He didn't need to rely on memory. The video showed who escalated, who controlled the space, who invoked authority without justification. And then discovery began. That's where the story widened. The officer's record was requested. Not rumors, not hearsay, but formal complaints. What emerged wasn't explosive. It was worse. Prior allegations of pretextual stops, complaints involving vague descriptions, encounters that ended without charges. None sustained, none disciplined, each dismissed individually. Together, unmistakable. A pattern not of criminality, but of tolerated conduct. The lawsuit didn't claim the department trained officers to profile. It claimed the department failed to stop it. Policies were requested next. Guidelines for pedestrian stops. Criteria for detention. Standards for escalation. What the legal team found wasn't malicious, it was absent. No clear policy defining when an officer could demand ID absent a crime. No requirement to document a suspect description before initiating a stop. No safeguard preventing vague language from replacing legal thresholds. Discretion filled the gaps. And discretion, unchecked, became the problem. The department argued the officer acted within professional judgment. The lawsuit responded with video. Professional judgment doesn't invent suspicion. It doesn't avoid answers. It doesn't escalate silence into threat. The city moved to dismiss. The motion failed. Because courts don't weigh feelings, they weigh facts. And the facts were consistent, time-stamped, and visible. Angela's attorney didn't frame the case as an emotional injury alone, though the harm was real. He framed it as structural. If an officer can detain a citizen in a public space without articulating cause, if that detention can be retroactively justified with vague language, then the Fourth Amendment becomes optional. That argument resonated, especially with one detail no one could ignore. Angela had done everything right. She complied. She remained calm. She didn't flee, argue, or provoke. And still, it wasn't enough. The lawsuit wasn't about punishing a single officer. It was about drawing a line between suspicion and cause, between authority and accountability, between discretion and constitutional limits. As the case moved forward, the department's posture shifted. Statements softened. Language changed. Because once a federal court accepts a case like this, it sends a message before a verdict ever arrives. Some stops are not mistakes. They are tests. And this time, the evidence ensured the test wouldn't be ignored, minimized, or quietly dismissed. The question now wasn't whether Angela Carter's rights were violated. It was how far the accountability would reach, and whether the system would finally be forced to confront what the camera had already made undeniable. The courtroom lights were harsh, sterile, and unyielding, reflecting the seriousness of what was unfolding within the federal courthouse. Angela Carter sat quietly, the hum of the room filling the space between words and the echoes of the event that had begun months earlier in a suburban parking lot. This wasn't just about one afternoon. It was about what that afternoon represented, the fragile line between ordinary life and the sudden, unwarranted exercise of power. By the time the case reached federal court, the department had already taken steps, small ones, measured ones, to mitigate further scrutiny. Officer Mark Reynolds had been placed on desk duty, restricted from public patrols. Not fired, not fully disciplined, but removed from the direct interaction that had sparked national attention. It was a gesture that acknowledged wrongdoing in form, if not yet in substance. The department's leadership attempted to frame it as procedural prudence, a matter of internal review. But the public, watching, felt the weight of delay, the lack of immediate accountability. Trust, once shaken, is not easily restored. For Angela and the broader community, the moment crystallized into a cautionary tale about the tenuous nature of civil liberties. You don't need a criminal record, a warrant, or a prior infraction to suddenly be placed under suspicion. A routine errand, pharmacy, groceries, dry cleaning, became a legal and emotional gauntlet, illustrating how quickly ordinary life can be interpreted as extraordinary and ordinary people as potential suspects. The subtle, almost imperceptible exercise of bias turned an afternoon of errands into a confrontation that was unnecessary, humiliating, and entirely avoidable. Courtroom proceedings began to dissect the incident with precision. Every movement, every word, every nuance captured on bodycam footage was replayed. The clarity of the video made the case undeniable. Angela had complied fully, never raised her voice, never resisted, and yet, her autonomy had been compromised. The officer's repeated assertions of a vague description, the implied threat of handcuffs, and the escalation without cause were not isolated misjudgments. They were systemic failures, reflective of a department culture that allowed unchecked discretion to override accountability. The public watched, legislators and oversight committees took notes, and the conversation extended far beyond Angela herself. What does it mean when bias can dictate the treatment of citizens in routine public spaces? How often are stops like this hidden in plain sight, unrecorded, unreported, and unquestioned? This case became more than a personal grievance. It became an examination of societal norms, of how authority can be exercised quietly but destructively. Routine stops, framed as safety measures or investigatory necessity, became rights violations when prejudice intervened. And yet, bodycams, the very technology designed to monitor behavior, didn't prevent the incident from occurring. They did, however, serve as an unflinching witness, capturing reality without alteration, revealing what authority had attempted to obscure. Cameras don't enforce ethical conduct. They make the consequences of ethical lapses visible. Community reaction was immediate and widespread. Local residents shared similar experiences, connecting dots between their own encounters and Angela's case. Social media amplified the story, and journalists highlighted the systemic questions raised. Law enforcement agencies faced public pressure to clarify policies, implement bias training, and reconsider discretionary powers that had previously gone unchecked. Public discourse shifted from isolated events to structural reform, from personal misfortune to societal accountability. Angela herself became a reluctant symbol of ordinary citizens' vulnerability in everyday spaces. She did not seek notoriety. She sought recognition that the law should protect all, not only those who are privileged, visible, or fortunate enough to avoid arbitrary scrutiny. Her calm composure during the stop, her insistence on clarification, and her eventual pursuit of legal remedy exemplified resilience and dignity under extreme pressure. The emotional weight of humiliation, the erosion of her sense of security in familiar places, and the indignity of being publicly detained had real consequences, not only personally, but for her family and the wider public who watched, recognized, and feared similar encounters. The federal case continues to set precedent, reminding communities and law enforcement alike that rights are not conditional, and that authority must be exercised with clarity, reason, and accountability. It is a cautionary tale for the everyday person, a lesson in vigilance, and a stark reminder of the fragility of civil protections when bias is permitted to fill gaps left by procedure, policy, or discretion. Angela's story demonstrates that even in routine, predictable settings, ordinary life can collide with extraordinary abuse of authority. The final takeaway is as clear as the bodycam footage itself. You don't need to be committing a crime to be treated like a suspect. You don't need confrontation to experience violation. Everyday activities, errands, shopping, driving, can become arenas where rights are questioned and dignity is tested. The technology that documents these encounters doesn't prevent harm. It simply exposes it, preserving truth when words fail. Authority is not inherently just. Compliance does not guarantee safety. Ordinary citizens can and will be caught in the crossfire when prejudice informs judgment, even when that prejudice is unspoken, subtle, and proceduralized. And so, the story closes with the most fundamental observation. She wasn't running from the law. She wasn't attempting to escape. She was running errands, the mundane, ordinary acts that structure daily life. And still, she got stopped. Even now, the images linger. Angela standing calmly in the parking lot, keys in hand, groceries at her side, dignity intact, while the weight of unwarranted suspicion hovered around her like a shadow. A reminder, to everyone watching, that accountability is not automatic, that authority is not infallible, and that the preservation of rights requires vigilance, evidence, and courage. Because sometimes, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, not because of the person, but because of the system meant to protect them. She wasn't running from the law. She was running errands, and still got stopped.